Hello! Everything you know about microphones is incomplete. I measured some. Nothing shocking happened. But I found out why two microphones with the same frequency response can behave very different. This is not a classic microphone review. No vocals, no acoustic guitars, and no "which one do you like better?" This is about time behavior, resonances, and why EQ works on one microphone and completely falls apart on another. When you look at microphone reviews on YouTube, you almost always see the same thing. Frequency responses, lines, curves, usually heavy smoothed. People speaking into microphones, turning them to demonstrate off-axis behavior. They talk about Peter's pickled piping pizza because of plosives. All fine, all good. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The thing is, that's not all you can say about microphones. I want to show why microphones sound different even when the frequency responses are matched using EQ. What we perceive as character, harshness, or smoothness has a lot to do with time domain behavior and surprisingly little with the pure amplitude frequency responses. The frequency response you know from manufacturers is not wrong, it's just one possible perspective. It's a stationary measurement, average decoupled from time. It tells us how a microphone reacts to steady sine waves. But music is not made of sine waves. Music consists of events, attacks, consonants, and transient onsets. In other words, time behavior. To look at exactly that, all microphones receive a spark discharge as an impulse. Not to measure absolute values, but to make relative differences visible. Same energy, same point in time, same evaluation. Here we see the first millisecond of several impulse responses overlaid from four very different microphones. A C480 with a CK61 capsule as a small diaphragm condenser, a C414 B-ULS as a large diaphragm condenser, a 260.80 rim microphone, and a SM57 as a moving coil dynamic. Not as competing products, but as representatives of different design principles. And yes, because I happen to own them. What you see here is not loudness, it's reaction speed. Some microphones are there immediately, others take time. That's not better or worse, that's character. A microphone that absorbs energy very quickly and releases it again quickly often sounds precise, open, sometimes unforgiving. A slower system stores energy for longer. That can sound warm or it can sound smeared. And yes, the SM57 really is noticeable slower here. It follows transients less accurately and continues to wobble afterwards. That can be a feature, it doesn't have to be. Another way to look at the same issue is the waterfall, or precisely burst decay. Here we don't just see where energy is, but how long it stays there. This is not a replacement for frequency response. It's a time-based complement. What's interesting here is not the color or the absolute levels, but the shape. Let's look at three typical cases. Steep short tails. Energy arrives and is gone immediately. Controlled, precise, easy to shape. Broad soft tails. Energy lingers a little longer but without clearly defined peaks. Often musical, non-aggressive and forgiving. Narrow long ridges. Their energy remains very specifically in one place. Resonances. Potentially problematic, later often perceived as harshness. Another important aspect is the slope of the impulse response. Steep slopes, fast acceleration; shallow slope, slower, more inert movements. Our hearing reacts particularly strongly to rapid changes. Steeper slopes means more detail, but also more risk. If you boost the high end of the microphone that already has very steep slopes, it can become sharp very quickly. With flatter slopes, the same EQ move is often much less problematic. The EQ doesn't just boost frequencies, it boosts the existing time domain behavior too. All of this depends on diaphragm properties and microphone construction. The mass of the diaphragm, the consistency of the suspension, resonances that can occur in the capsule, the diaphragm, and the microphone body, diffraction effects caused by the grill. Microphones are systems, and that is how I want to look at microphones here. There are no good or bad microphones. There are only microphones that are suitable for the specific job. To make the choice, the aspects discussed here can be generally helpful. So narrow band long decaying resonances are not fixed by EQ. They are amplified in time. We perceive that often as harshness. And that's why microphones can have a very similar high frequency response and still react completely differently to EQ. Broad resonances are much more forgiving and usually respond smoothly to EQ. If there's one thing you can mildly criticize manufacturers for, and I really do mean this politely, heavy smoothing of frequency response plots remove the user's ability to draw conclusions about EQability. If a frequency response shows narrowband irregularities, there is a certain chance that there are resonances that may later become problematic. Depending on what a microphone design is trying to achieve, these things cannot always be avoided. As I said, there are systems, and systems are, in general, compromises. This is not necessarily a bad intent, it's simply because time behavior is very hard to market. Taking a deep breath and talking for 2 hours is not exactly sexy from a marketing perspective. Pretty smooth lines are. In practice, this leads to a familiar effect. Two microphones look very similar on the datasheet, but one becomes harsh very quickly when EQ is applied, while the other remains extremely forgiving. That's not the EQ, that's the microphone. This is not a value judgment. A microphone with narrow resonances can sound extremely present in the raw signal, but it has less headroom for processing. It's not just EQ that can bring out narrowband resonances. Fast compressors can do it too, especially by changing their time behavior. For an example, you can hear this clearly as over-engaged sibilants in vocals. To avoid to give the impression that narrowband resonances are
some kind of evil.
Physically, a narrowband resonance simply means that energy is stored at a specific point and released more slowly. And that is exactly what happened when you try to deliberately shape a microphone. Let's briefly look at what actually happens inside a microphone capsule. A good example is the polar pattern. Directionality does not come for free. In directional microphones, sound is guided to the rear of the diaphragm through ports, openings, and acoustic paths. These paths delay and damp the sound to create directionality. To do that, manufacturers use small volumes, narrow channels, and damping materials like meshes or foams. From a physical point of view, all these elements store energy and release it over time. And this is exactly how resonances are created. The more precisely you try to shape the polar pattern, staple nulls, clean off-axis behavior, the more likely narrow band resonances become. The same applies to fast transient and open high frequencies. The lighter and freer a diaphragm is, the faster it reacts, but the more it tends to ring. Once you start thinking about microphones this way, narrow band resonances stop looking like mistakes and start looking like design decisions. When you look at impulse response, frequency response, and waterfall together, a fairly clear picture emerges. Not of how a microphone sounds, but of how it behaves. That explains why some microphones sound finished right away, but are difficult to shape in a mix, and why others sound unspectacular in the raw signal, yet are extremely easy to work with. That's not magic, that's time. Once you see this, you start hearing microphones differently, and you hear why frequency responses alone are not enough. Please be fully aware this measurement isn't perfect. The impulse isn't identically every time, and the microphones are measured one at a time. I'm not measuring absolute values here, I'm looking at relative differences. All microphones receive the same type of excitation and are evaluated using the same method. It's physics with a bit of dirt under the fingernails. That said, this setup doesn't capture everything that happens in real-world use. Off-axis sound, bleed, and complex source geometry matter a lot in practice. I just ask to keep that in mind. I dive into those aspects in a follow-up video, if you like. And subscribe. Do all dynamic, ribbon, large and small diaphragm microphones behave like the ones shown here? Absolutely not. There are certain tendencies, and that's about it. I cannot and do not want to offer absolute solutions or recommendations. There is more than enough marketing hype already. So I like to leave things quite modestly with this. Sapere aude. Dare to use your own understanding. Sweet dreams.